David Williamson, thanks so much for joining us for a chat.
It's a pleasure, Andrew.
First of all, I think we have a big audience of a lot of young playwrights and a lot of young actors who want to do more writing. I'd love to probably start with a bit about your process, because you're still writing plays today. Is it always the same when you start a new project, writing a new play, or is it always different each time?
It tends to be different. It can be initiated by some experience I've been through, someone I've met, something I've read that's annoyed me or otherwise. Usually there'll be the telltale signs of emotional connection. I'll either be angry, amazed, or something about the incident or the person, or and that sort of warns me that this may be the basis of a story. But then I do agree with the American playwright David Marmot that if you don't surprise yourself when you're writing, you won't surprise the audience. So I don't do a rigidly structured, complete outline with every moment detailed. I just know my characters, I know the situation, I know probably the issues, and it does, to a certain extent, evolve organically.
And I've heard you say, you know, if you're a writer, you should love writing, and it sounds like, is your process usually once you start writing, it does come, or is it a real struggle to get those plays out of you usually?
Oh no, look, once you're up and away, it does come, and it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, the first draft. As some other wise writer said, writing is about rewriting as much as anything, so I'll do anything up to a dozen, 15 drafts, getting feedback in the last stages from director, and then a reading before rehearsal with the actors, getting feedback from actors and director. It's an evolving process. The original, the way playwright is spelt is W-R-I-G-H-T, and it was called playwright in the 16th century because it was thought to be akin to a shipwright who gets the pieces of wood and whacks them together and makes something that floats and sails. So you were viewed as a craftsman.
Yeah.
And that still is the basis of the process, I think.
Do you think, like with acting, obviously there's so much work you can do aside from getting on stage in terms of, you know, warming up and other things outside of, I guess, doing the action of acting. Would you recommend to young actors or young playwrights to be just writing a lot, reading a lot? Is there sort of advice you have?
Seeing a lot, reading a lot, writing a lot if you want to be a writer. I have two actor sons, both NIDA trained, and both of them have done roles in my plays, and one in particular, after a couple of weeks of reading of the play, knows far more about my characters than I do. I mean, he'll do background research onto them. He'll invent a whole life from the year 0 onwards, what particularly happened to them. And I had no idea of that kind of detail. And he'll tell me, yeah, I think when he was 15, you know what happened to him? Yeah. A bully went, you know what, I don't know. Yeah. And so a lot of actors really like to invent a whole background tapestry for their character so they feel as if they know that character even better than the writer does.
Well, what's your feeling on actors kind of taking your roles in different directions? Have you been surprised a few times by what actors have done with your work?
Oh yeah, but look, the leeway is only so far. I mean, if you turn a character that's written as a comic act, as a comic character, and try and turn him into King Lear or tragedy or something like that, it's not going to work. To some extent, yes. The script is a blueprint for performance, as everyone says, and that's true. There are artistic, creative inputs to come after that from the creativity of the actors and director. So often, as a writer, you're pleasantly surprised by some interpretation you didn't anticipate, but which works perfectly and benefits the play. Occasionally you'll find an interpretation that you feel doesn't, but more often than not, the creativity of the director and the actors adds a lot to that blueprint.
Yeah. Have you got any, you've obviously had such wonderful actors work on your work over the years. Have you got any stories of actors taking a role in an area that you didn't expect and it surprised you in a way?
No, look, I've been terribly fortunate. I've had terrific directors and terrific actors, and they try and find the truth in the script and the rhythms. When my stuff doesn't work, and a few actors like Max Gillies have found this out, when he did one of my big roles many years ago in a play called The Department, he started to paraphrase the lines and then suddenly found they weren't working. Because it's a habit of a lot of actors, they think they can smooth out the lines or paraphrase, but often the lines are written with an inner rhythm. My work is often said to be naturalistic. Well, it's not. It's like a piece of music. There are vocal rhythms right throughout it. And if you paraphrase, you sometimes destroy those vocal rhythms and you don't get the most out of the text. Now, when Robert Nevin was directing my work, the younger actors tend to be like, I won't say method trained, no, not that, it wasn't that, but it was like trailing off in energy towards the end of a line, and and she would insist that they drive the line through to the end and hit the point that the line is supposed to hit at the end. She was most meticulous in that, don't just think you've done the line when you've got the first few words out, drive it through to the end, and a lot of the humour will come from getting those rhythms right.
That was probably one of the biggest lessons I learnt from Angela Punch McGregor, who I'm sure you know, when I was studying with her, just to drive the energy to the end of the line, and how much, especially for theatre, how important that is. So yeah. It's wonderful to hear that from a playwright, because I think actors do often feel that the play's here and I'm going to add something to it. And I think what we often try to say is that actually the best acting comes from when you trust in the playwright, and especially when you're working with a great playwright like yourself.
Well, thank you. But yeah, it's true. If you don't trust the playwright and think you can write better lines than they did, you shouldn't be doing that play, because you've got no respect for that particular writer. If it's a good writer, he will have given you the rhythms and the things to say, or she will have, and you'll do better to stick with them. I used to call it the Robert De Niroizing of the dialogue, when stutters and mumbles and repetitions were needlessly introduced into the lines to give the appearance of realism, but they utterly destroyed the lines usually.
Mm. I think a lot of actors get tripped up because, like you say, people like De Niro and that sort of movement of people thinking acting is naturalistic, which often people think is maybe low stakes. And actually, theatre still requires, I think, it sounds like you would agree, that it's not real life. It is still a heightened world, even though it's truthful. Yes. What's your sort of opinion on what theatre is in that realm of what it's trying to convey? Well,
I think the great strength of theatre is that at a final level, it is an examination of language, the way people use language. Now, slightly heightened in my case, and slightly more rhythmic than natural in my case, but it's a study of the joy of language in a way. A lot of film is just a few grunts and groans and a lot of explosions and a lot of cars crashing, and the dialogue is seemingly relatively unimportant. I don't like those sort of films, but stage does require an attention to language, because we've only got body language and language to tell our story on stage. There is some atmosphere, there's design, there's all of that, but basically you haven't got the visual weaponry that film has. You're naked on stage, you haven't got the close-up, you haven't got the pan, you haven't got a line told by a facial expression close up, you haven't got the atmospherics of the mist on the mountains rising in the morning. or the sunlight filtering through the trees with the blackbirds warbling. You haven't got all that unless you've got a very inventive stage designer. But you've got language and body language, and that's the beauty of stage for me. It can allow an exploration of language, and through that an exploration of character, which can go on at a higher level than is normal in film.
Do you think, seeing, I guess, your plays done over the years, do you think there's any trends in acting or things that we're losing over the years? Or do you still feel that actors are as exciting as ever and delivering your plays as well as ever?
Oh yeah, look. The younger generation of actors just gets better and better, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, no, the older generation. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. The older generation is fantastic, but the younger trained actors are just terrific now. They're used to a director saying, no, why not try, and they'll name another emotion, and the actor will just boom, straight onto it. Alternative readings are second nature to well-trained actors now. They just know that there are an infinite number of readings. If the director has a hunch that a different sort of emotional undertone might work better there, let's try it. And immediately they can change a performance. There's in sorting out Rachel, our young Rachel is...
Jenna Owen?
Yes, yeah. Yes, just electric. An energy level on stage that's unbelievably effective.
You mentioned, though, training. Do you think typically with actors you've seen that training is important for actors? Do you notice a difference?
Yeah, over the years I've found that that the trained actors can switch the interpretations faster and easier than someone who hasn't, because they do it all the time during their training. No, not that interpretation, try that, try this, try that. Whereas an untrained actor may be naturally very skilled, very good, but the flexibility often doesn't quite seem to be there. And directors know that. They know if they've got a trained actor, they can very quickly, instantly get a different reading, a different interpretation.
One other thing I watched in preparation for this interview was you talking about, I think when you were starting out in the 70s, that there wasn't much of an Australian theatre scene. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the importance of kind of telling your own stories and telling stories, out of your culture, I guess, for people. Did you feel that was an important step to take for Australia and something we still need to go further, or do you think we're telling our own stories now?
Well, not as much as I'd like to see. It's hard to tell your generation how it was when I was young, but how it was that Australian stories were just not seen on Australian stages, very little seen on television, and not seen at all on film. On stage, our major theatre companies were by and large controlled by English people who regarded their function as to educate and uplift the barbarous beer-swilling natives with the finer products of European culture. I'm exaggerating, but Australian actors, to be well trained, then used to have to go to England, learn 42 regional English accents, and come home and get roles here. Occasionally American plays would be done, but apart from the one day of the year and Summer of the 17th Doll, there was virtually zilch. And there was an anger around Carlton among young writers. There was an anger at the refusal of the theatre companies to even look at or consider Australian work. So Betty Birstall came back from New York, decided she wanted to hear our own accents on our own stages, started La Mama, the Pram Factory started around the corner, suddenly a hotbed of new work, and suddenly it was recognised there's an audience for this. People want to hear their own accents, they want to hear their own stories, that the pronouncements of our superior English masters that there was nothing interesting to write about in Australia was proven false. I mean, we're human beings like anyone else. We have the same gamut of emotions, the same gamut of conflicts. It was sheer arrogance to say that we didn't have stories worth telling.
So do you think you still can have a successful career as a playwright in Australia? Do you think there is a path that you can follow?
Well, I think it's pretty hard. Most of the young writers go into film or television these days to make a living.
That's a good segue. You've worked a lot in writing for film as well. How do you find that medium to be different to writing for the stage?
Look, it's an exciting medium, but the director has assumed more artistic power than they should assume. Good writing is still vital to cinema, but unfortunately we had the French invent the auteur theory, which meant that the director was the real author of the work. And these days it's an agony to be a film writer because every director that comes in reckons they can write. So I find film, or I have found film, occasionally terrifically rewarding when I've got a good relationship with the director, but sometimes you feel as if you're there just as the typewriter of whatever ideas the producer has, and when he's finished with having ideas, whatever ideas the director has. I think someone said that the history of film would be so much more exciting, if a little more erratic, if all the first drafts were filmed rather than the 50th draft.
Do you feel? Do you watch much TV? Do you feel TV is making? It seems like the writing in TV is incredible right now, and that's become the medium of great writing.
The medium of writers is quality TV drama. There is no doubt about it. Some of the work that's being done by the cable companies now, the American and even our cable companies here, is just so much more exciting and gripping and dramatic than the film work that's being done. And what the writers of good cable television have perfected is brilliant dramatic momentum. Again, in the words of David Marmot, why do people come to see theatre or film? To see what happens next. Well, the TV writers that have become producers because they have the power realise that that's what is absolutely, you've got to have the audience riveted.
But it's great. I mean, it's great to be having a chat and bypassing that directing stage, because I think from an actor's point of view, all actors love to work on great writing because it makes you a better actor when you're working. That's why I was recently working with Patsy Rodenberg, and I think she comes back to great writing and works on Shakespeare so much because the actor has to sort of step up to it, you know, and it makes you better and it makes the performance better.
Well, so many top American actors are choosing to go in the quality TV drama route than film because they know they're going to get better roles, they're going to get they're going to get a chance to explore a character in depth if it's a series. It's far more attractive than, you know, I find it hard to get enthused about many films except the independent films these days. I find it hard to get enthused about the Hollywood fare because it's short on character and short on good writing. But give me a good quality TV drama series and I'll be riveted.
I'd love to ask from a very personal question, because I do lots of different creative projects. I believe when you were starting in the 70s, it was a very kind of collaborative community that you had of different playwrights and actors, and obviously that's maintained. You were talking about working with, you know, cast still and doing reads, but it seems like you largely write on your own. Do you find, where do you sit on that idea of creativity being a kind of independent project versus collaborating?
I think there's room for both. My personal thing is to, because I find dialogue so delightful and fascinating to write, I like to write it. Some playwrights like John Romrell, who I respect greatly, always did a collaborative thing with the cast. He was more interested in the content they wanted to get on stage and interested in helping them get that content on stage. I was always more interested in exploring language and character in my own way. It's horses for courses.
Are there some great playwrights that you turn to or keep coming back to over the years that are your role models?
As a young man, seeing Harold Pinter, The Birthday Party, suddenly the bleakest form of humour, the unflinching delving into the darker aspects of the human psyche that he did, Edward Albee did. When I saw Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, there was the first playwright ever who was putting subtext directly into text. I mean, it was just raw and theatrically exciting. And I think playwrights like that opened up paths for the black comedy that emerged in Removalists and Don's Party.
Interesting. David Williamson, thanks so much for chatting with us. It's been lovely to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.